The NFL draft is 1 month away. We're so close. Can you believe it? It's almost here. And in celebration of Cam Ward's pro day today, hey, I figured, look, we're not stoning up here. We ain't tricking. This ain't kung foolery out here. We all know what's going on in the Tennessee Titans land. Speaking of which, that's what we're doing today. We got the Tennessee Titans rocking and rolling today. Music City vibes all day. And we're going to be going through this roster after free agency. Of course, it's still going on. They can still make some signings. They can change a lot of things. But for right now, it looks pretty clear on some areas that they need to address, and that's what we're going to do. We need to talk about the roster, though, first before we get into the mock draft. And that leads us into the offensive line, starting with the front five. And this is a good front five. You look at the stars here. Those are the guys that have been brought in this season from other teams. So just kind of highlighting those guys that have been brought in free agency. It starts off with the $20 million plus man, Dan Moore, left tackle. Presumably, I imagine that J.C. Latham slides over to his more natural position at right tackle, and Dan Moore stays at his natural position at left tackle. The Steelers tried him at right tackle. It really didn't work for him. Maybe Bill Callahan could get more out of him over at that right side if they truly did want to do that. But my guess is that he sticks to that left tackle position and they move JC over to that right tackle position. And on paper, these two guys, really solid starters that have a lot of upside in this room. I do think Dan Moore, coming off his best season as a pro, looked good. Yeah, I mean, he had his moments throughout the year. I thought he struggled maybe at the end of the season a little bit. Overall, though, he had a pretty dang good year in my eyes just watching the Steelers games. Then in terms of depth-wise, you got Nicholas Petit-Frere, John Ajoiku, Jalen Duncan, Isaiah Prince. Like, that's what they're looking like, which is not terrible. Now that you got John Ajoiku kind of stepping up more and more, and he showed that he can be a decent swing tackle for them. So I think they're in a pretty good spot tackle-wise. I'm not probably going to be adding any tackles, and I don't think that they really need to in this draft class. My focus would be on the interior of the offensive line. While it's a really solid up front, and hopefully Lloyd Cushenberry comes back from that Achilles, like that's going to be my big question there, is because that Achilles timeline, it might be a little tricky. He got injured, I believe, like week 9, somewhere in the mid portion of the season. So if they need Corey Levin to step in there at center for a little bit at the beginning of the season, like I'm not super worried about that. Actually, I think Levin could be a solid backup for them. So that's why I'm not like overly panicked on this either which way. You got Blake Hens, gives you some versatility on that offensive line. They just brought him in. I'm looking at more of a right guard of the future in this case scenario since Kevin Zeitler, great player. It's just he is, 35 years old or so. So that's something they're going to have to start thinking about. Who's going to be that long-term right guard? This is not a early priority, though. This is something maybe like round 4 through round 6. You can draft somebody, develop somebody, see if you can hit, and go from there. That's really the only thing that I would say going forward into this draft class that they absolutely need to be looking at. Besides that, just a little bit of depth, but they're in a pretty good spot with that starting 5. They got a little bit of depth too, and certainly an offensive line that looks to be better than it was last year. Into the wide receiving and tight end room though now, and this to me, the wide receiver wise, this is one of the biggest needs on the roster. It might be the second biggest need behind the quarterback position in this entire football team. So if you look at this, you got Calvin Ridley, Treylon Burks, Van Jefferson slated to be your starters, at least as of right now. And barring them picking somebody up at the moment, this is a big concern. Who's that wide receiver 2? Heck, who's the wide receiver number 3 at this moment? Treylon Burks really hasn't showed anything at this point. Van Jefferson, ideally as a guy that is like your 4th wide receiver. He couldn't be a wide receiver 3, but for me personally, I would love him to be that 4th guy that comes in rotation, etc. Not a bad player or anything like that. It's just, this is an area to me. You got Jaquinton Jackson, the 6th round selection from Tulane. Could be a good slot receiver for them. Bryce Oliver. So there's some options. Maybe they can step up here into a wide receiver 4 sort of role. But for right now, this to me is a huge area that we have to emphasize and we need to improve, especially if we're bringing a young quarterback in here. 100%, I'm going to be looking at this. This is an early need in the draft, barring them bringing somebody else like an Amari Cooper or a Stephon Diggs in free agency, which they could still do. They have some money. So we'll keep an eye on all those things. Tight end wise, Chika Okonkwo, Josh Wiley, good solid 1-2 punch. Now, Okonkwo is going to a contract year. That's something to consider. They could use another tight end here for some depth purposes, maybe like a blocking guy. So that's end of draft type of need. That's a UDFA. That's what I'm looking at here in this tight end room. It's not a huge priority. To me, it's the wide receiving position that needs a huge uptake in this offense for Brian Callahan. And that's where I'm going to be looking at really with Presidents. And then we go on to the running back room. Tony Pollard, Tajee Spears, Julius Chestnut. I would ideally like to add, like that fourth running back in here. Jamari Small, we'll see. But for me personally, yes, I do think that they could use a little bit of an upgrade in terms of that running back 3, running back 4 role, or at least adding some more depth for injuries. Tajay Spears has had through some injuries through his career. Tony Pollard. Those are some areas like you got a good starting 1-2 punch. Maybe you could use a little bit of a power back in here. So that would be my one little nitpick in this running back room. Maybe round 4 through round 6 in that areas of the picks that you have. Maybe you trade down, get another draft capital assets, etc. Then you could go get a power back somewhere and on day 3. But it's not a early priority, right? This is not something that you spend a first, second, or third round pick on. Now, an area that they do need to spend a premium pick on is the quarterback position. Will Levis, I'm still one of the people that I think Will Levis could be a franchise or at least a decent quarterback in the NFL with the right development and with the right offense of scheme fit. He just really is not a scheme fit in Brian Callahan's offense. Like, let's just be real. He really is not. He needs to be more of a McVay style of offense and like a run and gun sort of situation. And that's the exact opposite of what he's in here right now, which is more of a West Coast, get the ball out on time and things like that. Like, Will Levis is not that. His pocket presence is terrible. It's just not good. He, a lot of the times too, this past season, you can blame the offensive line, but he also took some of the sacks as well on him. And I also think that his decision making, obviously not the big, is a big problem too, and certainly cost his team some games. But the arm talent, the athleticism, the tools, like he's got all of that. Like he can make big time plays, and in certain offenses that can coach some of those things out of him and put him in better situations, I do think he is a trade asset. And if they do decide to trade him, which is what I would do, especially if you're taking a quarterback number 1, you can get something back in return for him, which would also maybe fill some of these other roster voids that they have. So that's something that I would consider. Brandon Allen, they brought in, solid backup, can help that rookie starter coming out here with his veteran leadership. Certainly, might want to pick up somebody else if they let go Will Levis. Overall, quarterback, we know it's a top need. You've seen the thumbnail. We all know what's going on here. Like I said, I ain't tricking nobody. Let's go on to the defense side of the ball now. And the defensive line, which is a good defensive interior, right? This is a top tier interior. You got Tavondre Sweat, you got Jeffrey Simmons. Those two guys, they changed the game, right? That's when you're an offensive coach and you're saying you got to go up against Jeffrey Simmons and Tavondre Sweat. That's going to change your game plan because those two guys are wrecking machines. Sweat as a rookie was so good. And Jeffrey Simmons, obviously, we know he's really good. You got Sebastian Joseph Day back on a 1-year contract, so that's good. He's a solid player. It's the depth. That's the only thing that I would say here is they could use a little bit more depth in rotation. That's the only, that's the area I'll be looking at in the draft. This is like a day 3 need. This is round 4 through round 6. That's something I'll be looking at it there, but not a huge top priority. The edge position is the top priority on the defensive side. We need to improve the edge rushing room, period. And that, to me, between Draymond Jones, Arden Key, both on 1 year, they only have 1 year left on their contracts with Arden Key and Draymond Jones is brought in on a 1-year contract. You have Lorenzo Carter on a 1-year deal. Jalen Harrell, solid, maybe 4th, 5th guy that can compete there. But overall, like this is an area that is a top need on this roster and something that I think that they either double dip in the draft or you select with that 2nd round pick, etc. Like they have to prioritize getting the edge rusher, not just for this season, but mainly for next season and beyond, right? To infinity and beyond. They need help here in Tennessee, and I will be looking at in the draft. Whether that is an early selection or a double dipping in the draft or unanimous, we got to improve it. We go on to the linebacking core. And you look at this linebacking core, it's very unknown. There is some unknown to this room. Now, they brought in Cody Barton on a 3-year deal, $9 million guaranteed. It's $21 million over 3 years, so $7 million average. Very fair contract for a guy that's been there, done that, has experience, is a good run defender. You got your coverage guys between Cedric Gray, James Williams. I think James Williams actually has potential to be a very, very good cover man. Obviously, has his former safety background. He played pretty well, too, from my eyes at the end of the year. And I think he should get an opportunity to be a starter with Cedric Gray. I still like Cedric Gray, though, a lot. He was just dealing with some injuries and somebody that I think when he gets a full off season and developing plan, Denard Wilson as the defense coordinator, they coach him up. I do think that Cedric Gray has a potential to be a really good starter opposite of Cody Barton and James Williams in that rotation as well. Like those 3 guys, certainly Otis Reese can be more than a special teamer as well. So to me, this is a room that you need to add to. You definitely need to be looking at least adding some competition here. It is not my number 1 priority. At least you have some youth in here that has some promise. You got your veteran leadership in Cody Barton. It's not an elite room by any standards. It's definitely a below average room at the moment. but it's not something that I'm looking to spend an early pick on with the other needs on this roster. And then moving on to the secondary here, I mean, you've got 3 solid starters between L'Jarius Sneed, Jarvis Brownlee, and Roger McCreary. It's really just comes down to a little bit of depth. You got Daryl Baker Jr. as your main fourth corner. We'll see if Gabe Judy Lally can be a guy. Certainly showed some skills at Tennessee as a playmaker, but he might just be more of a special teams guy early on and whatnot as he continues to develop through his career. And that's what I'm saying. They just need a little bit more depth, just in case for injuries and going into the future, etc. L'Jarius Sneed has had some injuries now, hasn't played football in a little bit, so that's something to consider. I'm good with their starters. Need to add some depth on day 3. That's really all we need to do at this point. Finally, finish up the roster breakdown with the safety room. My main thing here is it's really going to depend on what this coaching staff wants to do and what their vision is for the future, because Amani Hooker is a free agent after this next season. My guess, though, is he gets an extension before he even hits the field this season. He had a really good year. He deserves a pay raise. I would give him an extension. He's a young football player. What is he, just about to turn 27? He is a talented safety. I would give him an extension, like a 3-year deal or something like that. With Xavier Woods, that 2-year deal, you probably can get out of it after 1 year. However, he is a solid, steady Eddie type of safety, and I'm okay with him playing out that contract. Even when he's 30 years old, so he still has a couple of good years absolutely left in the tank, in my opinion. He's been reliable going back to the Dallas and the Carolina days for him. So for me personally, you can't predict injuries and all those sort of things. Could they use a little bit more depth? Mike Brown stepped up and played well, so I feel like they got 3 solid safeties in here. I think this is an area that could be a late day 3 option UDFA pickup, but for right now, with the assumption that they're going to give a extension to Monty Hooker before the actual season begins, Xavier Woods is a solid safety. This is not an area that I'm prioritizing comparative to other areas. This is probably more of a next year type of draft need when you can develop behind Xavier Woods for a season or something like that. All right, Titans fans, it's draft time. And with that first overall pick, in celebration of the Miami Hurricane Cam Ward's Pro Day today, and this would be the day that Mike Borgonzi, Brian Callahan company, who are there, and they'll be watching very closely, I am sure, this could be the day that they say to themselves, Cam Ward is going to be the number 1 overall pick. Or whether or not they will say to themselves, look, let's go ahead and pick up a Russell Wilson. Let's pick up an Aaron Rodgers. Let's trade back. Let's go with an Abdul Carter, a Travis Hunter, and go that route. Maybe select a quarterback later on or wait till next season. Like that, to me, this is the day that we're going to find out a lot more about what this Tennessee Titans team wants to do. So I'm taking Cam Ward from what I know right now, what I feel that they are going to be doing. Ward has all the tools. He's got that sidearm gunslinging, velociraptor that I like, and certainly improvisational skills as well from some of these top quarterbacks out there. Of course, you worry about the decision making, some of that, and maybe like the more diagnosed coverages give him problems, and that goes hand in hand with his decision making. He's come a long way from a wing T offense and what he's done year over year to get better and better. From Incarnate Ward to Washington State to Miami.
They call for you, the general who became a slave, the slave who became a gladiator, the gladiator who defied an emperor.
He has made big time improvements throughout his entire career, and if he can continue to build on that, absolutely can be a franchise quarterback. As I was saying, they need a quarterback. It's the clear need, especially looking at the roster right now. That's where we're going. On to our second pick, though. It's Trey Harris. A shocking move, right? And you're saying to yourself, whoa, I've not seen this one at all. And let me explain, all right? I need to explain because Trey Harris, I feel like, first off, is super underrated. If it weren't for the injury concern, possibly he has been banged up through his career. And maybe you say the Ole Miss offense, a little bit gimmicky. There's a lot of hitches, go balls, things like that, slants. So that Trey Harris, that was really his route tree. But when you really dig into his film and see what he brings to the table in terms of a size to speed overall combination, I think he could be a true number 1 wide receiver. I think he's so underrated when it comes to his overall ability to separate and to separate quickly as well at his size. Like he has good separation ability and he wins on slants. He wins on intermediate routes. Of course, he wins on those deep routes. And you might say, well, at the next level, 4.5, 4 speed, I believe is what he put up at the combine. He had good explosiveness numbers, so at like 38-inch vertical plus and stuff like that. So like he's an explosive guy and he does win consistently on field, deep down the field and in one-on-one situations too. It's not like blown coverages where he's just blowing by dudes. Like he's winning on his routes deep, which is huge. He did have a couple of, I thought, drops this season, like focus drops. So there's some things maybe he needs to work on a little bit. Overall, though, like you talk about all the traits to succeed, a good release package. He's even a tough-nosed blocker. he can be a true number one wide receiver for this football team. I'm taking him here. I think he's got so much upside and can be a nice option with Calvin Ridley as your two wide receivers. To our first fourth round pick, I'm going with Olufemi Oladejo, UCLA pass rusher. He put up a show there at the Senior Bowl. And he's a guy that is very raw. If you go out on film, and he's only a 1-year full-time edge rusher, former linebacker, you see it. He's just not there with his finesse. He doesn't really have a plan with his pass rush. He doesn't really know how to disengage from blockers consistently. There's a lot that he needs to work on as a true edge rusher, but the tools are there. Like, he's got the explosiveness, he's got the speed, he's got the size. So that, to me, if you can develop this guy over a season or two, you've got some guys in there right now between Draymond Jones, Arden Key, and also Lorenzo Carter. Let's go ahead and find some developmental pass rush here with Olufemi Oladejo, who certainly has the tools to be a really good edge rusher. Is just going to need some time and some right development. And then the theme of more pass rush, that's what we're doing here with this next fourth round pick. I'm double dipping. I want to go and grab another guy, Antoine Powell-Ryland from Virginia Tech, a guy that is very athletic, very bendy as well. He's the guy that can certainly bend the arc. He's got that ability to dip and rip and certainly show some nice speed to power as well to kind of throw off tackles. Now, he is a little bit more of a speed guy, right? He's not going to overwhelm you with power, and I do think stronger offensive linemen that get their hands on him because he doesn't have the ideal length, that will be a problem for Antoine Powell-Ryland. That's why he's going to have to really develop those pass rush tools as best as he can to work and mitigate with the lack of length and maybe size profile. He isn't the biggest guy either. So that, to me, he's built pretty well. I mean, he is a little bit an older prospect. I think he's like 23 years old, whereas Olufemi Oladejo is 21 years old. I think that Ryland's more further along with his development in that regard as a pass rusher, but maybe doesn't have the upside and those traits that Oladejo has. But I think Ryland's a really good football player that can get out there and outperform his draft position, and a really good, if nothing else, DPR pass rusher that this team desperately could use. Keeping in line with the defensive line and adding more depth to this defensive line, we're going with Riley Mills, who I feel like with Sebastian Joseph Day on a 1-year contract, let's try to find a developmental guy with some size, some speed, and some traits like Riley Mills, who can develop for a season. He played up and down that line for the Fighting Irish and was in, big time part to that defensive line. Him and Howard Cross on that front four. So Riley Mills, with his traits, can develop into a really nice player. He is coming off a knee injury, which he had to have surgery on after that Indiana game, unfortunately, so that can keep him out a little bit. But once again, this is a developmental guy that we can draft and we can get. We got Sebastian Joseph Day. Let's get Riley Mills in there really for the future and that future plan. That's really what I'm looking at with him. Needs to work on his leverage, needs to work on adding more play strength. Those are all things that we can do. Get stronger, get better with his technique, et cetera, et cetera. He's going to be some big-time depth on that defensive line. More depth on the offensive line. Miles Frazier from LSU. A Bill Callahan special right here. And he is a guy that fits that big, strong, physical, imposing offensive line build is Miles Frazier. And he played right guard for them. He has that experience, so you can give him a little bit of time to develop there with Kevin Zeitler coming in for a season. And he does have versatility on the offensive line, but I could see him as that right guard of the future. At least that's my vision for this pick. He needs to work on his balance. Like, that to me is one of his big things. He plays over his toes way too often. That's why he falls for me into the 5th round. If it weren't for that, like, he was more under control, didn't play so high either. Like, he's a bit of a waist bender. That can be a bit of a problem for him. So some of those things he's going to have to really iron out in his game, but he certainly has that grip strength. And when he gets hands on you, man, he's got solid length. I think it's just under 33-inch arms. So, like, solid strength, good size, really, really good power profile that can develop with the right coaching into a starting offensive lineman in the future. I want to go ahead and add some more depth in the secondary. Jamari Harris from Iowa. So they go back to Iowa for another DB in this secondary. Harris is an interesting little evaluation here. He is an older prospect. He'll be like 25 years old-ish when the season begins. I think his birthday is like September or something like that. But he's got good size. He's got good speed. His instincts are good. He fits with that Iowa whole theme where he's really solid in zone coverage and his instincts and backpedal and stuff like that. He's quick coming out of his backpedal and things like that. So, like, a lot of the zone technique, it's there. And he can play man coverage, I feel like, in a pinch. Overall, like, he's a zone cover corner. It could also end up being a safety. I feel like he could develop in that role with his instincts and whatnot. The age, the off-the-field stuff, he's had some injuries. He's had a couple of suspensions. I believe one for gambling and one for another issue or whatever. So he's had some, I think it was like some sort of off-the-field thing, incident or whatever. But he's had some of those things off there. I don't want to judge. Look, everybody goes through their different struggles and things like that. So, in maturing and all those sort of things. But Jamari Harris here at the end of the draft, taking a chance on him with his traits and upside there as a developmental corner, safety, defensive back, whatever you want to put him at. And then to finish up the draft, we're going with Minnesota Gopher, Cody Lindenberg. He's going to be a nice developmental linebacker for them in like a Cody Barton sort of role. And that's the thing. Like, he's probably going to take a couple of years to develop here. However, he's got the size. He's got some toughness to his game. He's got a little stronger with his play strength and his tackling ability. He's not an elite cover man either, but you've got some guys like that. And James Williams, I think Cedric Gray can step up too at that point. But overall, I think Willenberg can be a good, solid special teamer early on that could develop into a Cody Barton role. I want to make sure we're just at least adding somebody for some depth purposes, if nothing else, with a guy that has upside there. As a former captain for the Gophers as well, he knows what he's doing out there. He's been a leader for that defense and certainly hopefully can bring some more leadership to that defense here for Tennessee. And now we look at the roster after the draft, everything we did. Once again, the draft is going to be up to interpretation. Everyone's got their own value on players, who should go where, this or that, right? Who's available. But at the same time, I try to keep things as conservative possible. I try to do like one maybe reach, one steal. Like I try to mix it up as much as I can. And depending on the players who fall, the board, it always looks different when the actual draft happens. I'm mainly focusing on the positions that we need to address, and that starts with the quarterback position on the offense. We got Cam Ward here. Maybe it signals Will Levis is going to be traded after this. Cam Ward as the franchise quarterback now. And then you look at wide receiver. I think this is the other bigger need on the roster is finding another weapon for the young quarterback now, Cam Ward. And I feel like we did that with Trey Harris. I know some people might say that's a huge reach. You could trade down, whatever. I totally understand that. I'm not trading down in these mock drafts. I'm just going as is. I think Trey Harris could even be a first-round prospect if it weren't for some of the injury things that you have to think about. But in terms of what's on the field, I think he's very much in the conversation in the first round as those other guys at the back end of the first round. I would take him. I think he can be a true number one wide receiver. And then you look at the rest of this roster. Offensive line, we addressed that. We got Miles Frazier to develop for a season by Kevin Zeitler. Now, two areas that we could have added is a blocking tight end or a power running back in here. That is something that I feel like they're missing. Julius Chestnut's not bad in that regard, but they could use more another power element. They could use another blocking tight end. Those are both areas I think that we could add, and especially if they were to trade down at some point, pick up a couple extra draft picks, that certainly is in play for this football team. And then defensively, it was mainly about finding defensive line help, right? For me personally, let's go attack the edge position, and I feel like we did that with Olufemi Oladejo, Antoine Powell-Ryland. Since I went wide receiver in the second round, I wanted to double dip, and we got two edge rushers, one with a lot of developmental upside, one that I feel like is going to be a really good DPR that could end up being a really good starter as well, who's got some great bend, both players with some athletic traits that have potential to be starters. And once again, my hope is that one of them, at least one of them hits and could be a long-term starter, because if you hit on one of them, then you're saying to yourself, all right, we bring in one free agent to combat with some of these young guys that we've got here. So Ryland and Oladejo, you bring in a veteran, top quality edge rusher in next year's free agency class. You feel a lot better. I would feel a lot better about that personally. And you got a stud interior defense line, which I wanted to add some more depth in Riley Mills with Sebastian Joseph Day on a one-year deal, making sure we have good depth behind Devondre Sweat and Jeffrey Simmons, keeping those guys fresh all year long are very important. And then mainly getting some depth at the linebacker position. Cody Lindenberg and then Jamari Harris in the secondary, because they are a little thin in both of those areas. So that is going to do it here for the Tennessee Titans mock draft. And I hope you remember the Titans. And man, we need to have a good draft here, and wish you guys the best. And hopefully after today, there might be a little more clarity on what goes on. Will Cam Ward be the quarterback for the Tennessee Titans? What will they end up doing? I think there will be a lot more clarity after today. So anyway, let me know what you think. Agree or disagree. What would you do differently for the Tennessee Titans? What is your real dream draft, right? What would you say to yourself? Oh man, if they did this, I'd be like, woohoo! What would you do to go crazy, right? What would be a backflip scenario? Anyway, have a really good day. I'll talk to you later.